The Eternal Loop House. The Robinson family, Mark, his wife Emily, and their two children, Sarah and Jake, were thrilled to move into their new home. The Victorian-era house stood at the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by tall, old trees. It seemed like the perfect place to start a new chapter in their lives. The first few days were peaceful. They spent time unpacking, exploring the expansive property, and getting to know their neighbors. Everything seemed perfect until the night of the fifth day. It was midnight when the eerie chime of the old grandfather clock echoed through the house. Mark and Emily were jolted awake by the sound, their hearts pounding. They checked on their children, who were also awake and frightened. Reassuring each other that it was just an old clock making noise, they all eventually fell back to sleep. The next morning, a sense of unease lingered in the air, but they went about their day as usual. As the day turned to night, the family settled in for bed, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He glanced at the clock. It was 11:59. As the clock struck midnight, a cold chill filled the house, and the lights flickered. The eerie chime sounded again, but this time it was followed by a series of horrifying events. The walls seemed to close in, shadows danced malevolently, and ghostly whispers filled the air. The family was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. Sarah screamed as she saw a shadowy figure at the end of her bed, its hollow eyes staring into hers. Jake felt icy fingers grip his ankle, pulling him towards the darkness under his bed. Emily watched in horror as the reflection in her bedroom mirror grinned back at her, its smile stretching unnaturally wide. The terror lasted for what felt like an eternity, but suddenly everything went silent. The clock showed 12:01. The family huddled together, shaken but relieved that the nightmare was over. They decided to investigate the next day, thinking it might be a prank or a malfunction. However, when they awoke, everything seemed normal. The day passed without incident, but as midnight approached, the same sense of dread returned. The clock struck midnight, and the same terrifying events unfolded. Shadows, whispers, and the sensation of being watched. This pattern continued night after night. The Robinsons were trapped in a loop, reliving the same nightmare every night at midnight. Desperate to escape, Mark began researching the history of the house. He discovered that the previous owners had all mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only cryptic messages about time and curses. One night, determined to break the loop, Mark stayed up late, poring over old journals and records. He found a passage that mentioned a hidden room in the basement, a place where time stood still. The key to breaking the curse was said to lie within that room. At 11:50, Mark gathered his family and led them to the basement. They found a hidden door behind an old bookshelf. With trembling hands, Mark opened it, revealing a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was an old clock, its hands frozen at midnight. "We have to destroy it," Emily said, her voice shaking. Mark nodded and grabbed a nearby hammer. As he swung it towards the clock, the room filled with an ear-splitting scream. The walls trembled, and the shadows writhed as if in pain. The hammer connected with the clock, shattering it into pieces. For a moment, everything went dark. The Robinsons held their breath, waiting for the nightmare to begin again. But when the lights returned, the oppressive atmosphere was gone. The house felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. They cautiously returned to the living room. The grandfather clock showed 12:05. The loop was broken. Exhausted but relieved, they collapsed onto the couch, tears of joy streaming down their faces. But the next night, as they tried to sleep, Emily woke up to a noise in the hallway. She found Mark standing there, staring blankly into the darkness. "Mark, are you okay?" she whispered, approaching him. He turned to her, but something was wrong. His eyes were empty voids, and his smile was eerily wide. Before she could react, Mark lunged at her, his hands transforming into monstrous claws. Emily screamed as he dragged her towards the basement, leaving a trail of blood in their wake. Sarah and Jake woke to the horrifying sounds of their mother's screams. They ran to the basement and found Emily lying lifeless on the floor, blood pooling around her. Standing over her was not their father, but a grotesque creature with Mark's face, twisted and distorted into a monstrous form. The creature turned its gaze to them, and they felt a chilling dread unlike anything before. "Run!" Sarah yelled, grabbing Jake's hand. They raced upstairs, the creature's guttural growls echoing behind them. As they reached the living room, the grandfather clock struck midnight again, the sound now a sinister toll. The house began to shake, and the shadows seemed to come alive, reaching for the children. In a desperate bid to escape, Sarah and Jake fled the house, bursting through the front door and running into the night. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the property, panting and trembling with fear. As they caught their breath, they realized something was wrong. The world around them seemed distorted, the trees and sky warping unnaturally. They were still in the same place, yet everything felt different, like a twisted mirror of reality. "We need to get help," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We need to find someone who can help us." They walked to the nearby town, but as they reached the main street, they noticed something horrifying. The town was eerily empty, and the buildings were decayed and abandoned. It was as if they had stepped into a ghost town. Desperate, they continued to explore, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could help them. But no matter where they went, they found only desolation and decay. The realization slowly dawned on them. They had escaped the house, but they were trapped in another dimension, a twisted version of their own world. As the sun set, the shadows grew longer, and the eerie whispers returned. Sarah and Jake huddled together, realizing they were not alone. The monstrous creature that had taken their father's place was still hunting them, its guttural growls echoing through the empty streets. They were trapped in a nightmare, a dimension where time stood still and horror lurked around every corner. There was no escape, no end to their terror. They could only run, hoping to stay one step ahead of the creature that haunted their every move, forever trapped in the twisted reality of the eternal loop house.